I think my comments would be, I'll limit my comments to the problems high-speed rail is capable of solving. And unfortunately, we live in a country today where we have a lot of long-term problems and a lot of short-term thinking. And therein lies part of the problem with high-speed rail, okay? The idea that we build high-speed rail is a very long-term phenomenon. There's going to be a lot of planning. Those financial commitments need to be made over long periods of time. And I'm dubious as to whether or not we can summon the necessary willpower to put that together. Nevertheless, the three sort of lenses that I view high-speed rail through are an economic lens, an urban lens, and an energy lens. Okay, so let me just take a brief moment to explain my thinking on all three of those. Okay, number one, on the urban side, we obviously had a housing crisis in this country. The housing crisis is related in some part to cheap financing, tax benefits from the government for mortgage interest deduction, and what we've done is we've pushed out and out and out. Okay, there are all kinds of sustainability issues with our urban sprawl development. I don't think that is a model for this country going forward, and I think that we are in a sort of reflection period now where we're all starting to question what is the future urban landscape going to look like in this country. And I, for one, don't believe I do believe we are going to correct that problem. And I think one of the reasons we're going to see the country do that is because when you look at places like Phoenix, when you look at places in Florida, what I call the sand states, okay, so Florida, Las Vegas, right? Las Vegas and Arizona, of course. I mean, the Phoenix are sand because of the desert. Florida is sand because of the beach. These sand places, I think they're in trouble over a long period of time. Their economic resiliency is going to be challenged because they're going to suffer under the weight of many of these housing problems for probably the better part of a decade. It's going to take them a long time to get out of that. And so I seriously think that the cities, the regions that are thriving are going to promote in a very big way concentrated urban development. Okay, and I think you're you're seeing that in some of these more progressive places around the country. So high-speed rail fits in very naturally to a more concentrated urban form. Okay, and that doesn't mean central cities. It certainly doesn't mean apartment living. That's not what I'm advocating. I don't think anybody's advocating that. But the idea that we don't drive 15 miles to get to the grocery store or 15 miles to get to your friend's house. Okay, this is just simply not sustainable in the long run. That ties into my energy comments as well. So I think that the urban form is likely to readjust in a way that is going to be more compact. Now that doesn't mean, so take a city like Seattle, for example. That doesn't mean that everybody lives in Seattle, but what it does mean is that between, say, Seattle and Portland, you're going to have pockets of cities that are going to be far more concentrated than you will have people living further out into closer to the mountain ranges of the Cascades, for example. It's just not going to be able to support that. I think high-speed rail fits in nicely there. That's my first comment. My second comment is how high-speed rail fits into the economic development of the future. We know that agglomeration economies exist. Okay, it's sort of taken for granted. Now, those benefits, they're fungible, they're maybe a little bit difficult to measure, but we clearly understand these agglomerations take place in cities. But the extent of those agglomerations have been pushing out for a long time. And I think that as a country, where we are sort of wondering whether or not we're losing our edge in the world, which I reject that argument, of course, but there's a real fear, I think, in many ways. And so what we need to be thinking about is how do we stimulate, how do we lubricate that innovative economy? How do we make those connections, facilitate those types of connections? How do we build those agglomerations? How do we allow them to nurture themselves? And I think high-speed rail fits in nicely on that. Those agglomerations are not going to materialize if we continue to invest in the automobile. It just simply isn't going to work. These cities are going to choke themselves off. It's too expensive to live in cities. So entrepreneurs who are getting their businesses off the ground aren't going to cities. So where are they going? They're going outside the city. They're going to these office parks. They're going into more remote locations. So we need to figure out a way to connect those places of opportunity, whether they're university towns or whether they're edge cities or even cities further away. We need to figure out how to connect them and those places to the financing and the fire, or the fire industries, right, that we find mostly in downtowns. And I think as far as an innovative ecosystem, high-speed rail fits in very nicely in terms of a long-term path towards sort of reinvigorating the innovative aspect that cities have grown to signify. And I would say the third comment is on energy. Okay, we have obviously an energy crisis looming. I don't know when. I don't think anybody can make that argument. But it is the government's job, in my view, to be forward-thinking. And whether we hit $200 oil barrel next week because Iran and Israel go to war, or we hit $200 a barrel oil in 10 years because we have another 300 million people in China driving cars, we are probably getting to the place where oil is going to be more expensive. High-speed rail offers you a natural energy hedge against an all oil-based transportation system. If you could have electrified trains, you are naturally hedging yourself against rising oil prices. And if we ever built out a national electric grid based on renewables, of course, then we could power that with a non-oil-based energy system. So I think that in terms of high-speed rail serving to solve some of these long-term problems, it's well-suited, but we just in this country are incapable for many reasons about thinking in the long term. It's all about short-term thinking, and that's natural in a period when people are feeling a lot of anxiety. Okay, a couple of other comments, and I'll go. I don't want to stand up here forever. I do think this is a form of industrial policy. I agree with you. I think a lot of people get scared to death of industrial policy. They think of it as stimulus. They think of it as government takeover and all that other stuff. But we do need to have that industrial policy mind frame. All of our competitor countries have it. If we don't do it, we're ceding considerable ground, in my view, to them. However, the word stimulus is toxic today. It cannot be stimulus. It should not be stimulus. Amtrak costs the government $1 billion a year, right? This is not something that anybody, even if you think the government can solve problems, should be wanting to sign up for. So there has to be a marriage between the private sector and the government. So the government's role should be in technological standardization. It should be in the use of eminent domain, as he mentioned. Okay, there are some issues where the government can play a role, but the private sector really does need to put the meat on the bone. And I think they're willing to do it, especially if they share that vision of $8 a gallon gas, $10 a gallon gas, which eventually could ultimately come. There's a great book called How $20 a Gallon Gas is Going to Change Our Lives for the Better. Anybody heard of that book? Anyway, he makes the comment at $8 a gallon, the skies will empty, right? And they will. I mean, it's just not going to be feasible to fly. The airlines simply are not going to be able to offer you a competitive flight anywhere if gasoline gets that high. So I do think the private sector is willing to step in if they have that same sort of long-term vision that we do. Having said that, there are some significant problems for which I don't have an answer. Where do you put those stations? I agree. Do you put it at the airport? Do you put it downtown? Boy, that's a lot. There's a lot riding on that. How do you structure the financing? Okay, in China, for example, the Ministry of Rail offers up 70% of the costs if the provinces pick up to 30%. Okay, so provinces trip over themselves because there's free federal money coming in. Well, for us, we've had two examples, one in California, one in Florida, where the states can't get their act together to figure out how to come up with the money to secure some of that federal funding. Well, what do you do when you have the rail line crossing state boundaries if you're going to try and connect Seattle and Portland? Boy, you've got some real problems there, and I don't have the answer. So there are certainly some hiccups there. And then lastly, of course, there's this whole concept of carbon policy or cap and trade, which to me is really the sort of coup de grace, right? Did I say that right? Right. Right. If you could get there, of course, high-speed rail, of course, has a lot, but we're far away from there. So I would say my arguments are threefold: urban revitalization, re-urbanization, so to speak; 2, economic, on a agglomeration innovation effect; and 3 is on energy, where we could diversify away from an oil-based transportation sector.